and thanks for joining us today. You're listening to the Shea, Vaughn Show, and I'm your host, Shea Vaughn. You're here on the Women's Broadcast Television Network, which is WBTVN. And WBTVN is the All Women's Network. And all the content is actually created by women and for women. And on the Shea Vaughn Show, we actually bring experts on and we put them in the spotlight. And that's what we're going to do today. So joining me as my guest today and as our expert is Dr. Melissa Popovich. She began her nursing education directly out of high school at Capital University in Columbus, Ohio. And over the years, she continued her education to the graduate level and with her terminal degree, Doctor of Nursing Practice. Melissa's science in nursing has a focus on legal studies from Capital University. Please help me welcome her to the show. Dr. Melissa, how are you?
Doing very well, thank you.
So great to have you on the show. And I love your background. And you know, it's always like we hear about the doctors and all the things that they do, but nursing has really taken a more of a front position, especially with patients. So my question to you is, to start out with, is tell me a little bit about your background in growing up and how did you get to where you are today? I mean, what inspired you all of a sudden to become a nurse?
Well, Shea, I grew up in eastern Ohio along the Ohio River in a very small town called Martins Ferry. I actually am the first graduate in my family to go and finish a bachelor's and a master's and a doctorate. I came from a very small family. I have an older brother who's 8 years older. And my mother, God love her, is still alive. She's 89 and lives in the house where I was born.
Wow. That's great. I mean, yeah. You know, I do want to share with you, I actually was raised in Ohio, in Newark, Ohio. Yeah, so very.
I am so close to Newark, Ohio. Yeah. I live in Granville, Ohio right now.
Wow. We were neighbors and didn't even know it. Awesome.
Well, next time you come back, we'll have to go and have dinner or lunch, and we'll go to Granville Inn. They have
I go to Granville Inn all the time, and I still have a brother that lives there in Newark, and I will definitely look you up. So glad that we talked about that. So from there, then, so your brother, you've got an older brother, and you came from a small family.
So I guess why I really wanted to become a nurse. Back when I was 5 years old, my mother and I were out visiting some relatives and some friends, and my brother and my father went to a football game. Football in the Ohio Valley is one of those things, right?
Yes, everybody goes.
So that night wasn't a very good night. My dad passed away. He had a massive heart attack at the age of 46, and we were kind of gathered up and taken to the emergency room where he was. The most relevant experience ever in my life was that night. So I had a very cold ER room with yellow subway block and a very heavy nurse dressed in white with a white nurse's cap. And she picked me up, and I kind of remember my mom fainting at the door and the doctors trying to help my mom, and my brother was kind of sitting there crying, and some other family arrived. She sat me in his bed in the ER, and she said, his hand is going to be cold because his soul went to heaven. And she told me that I should really just touch him and tell him I love him. And that was such a great experience for me. I knew from that point on, talked about it all the way through middle school, high school. I went to Capital University. It's a Lutheran college in Columbus on scholarship. And I enjoyed nursing from the very first time I was in the classroom.
Wow. That's a great story, and a nice way to understand when somebody passes that you love, that they've gone to, a different place, but you got to say, hold their hand, and you got to, to say goodbye. And there's so many people that have stories that they missed getting to that hospital, or the timing just didn't work out. And so they always kind of like, I think, feel, and I'm sure that you see this all the time in your work, where they would have wished that that wouldn't have been that way, that they would have had those last seconds, together.
And, I see that passion in a lot of the nurses. I've been in nursing for 26 years. When I started nursing, there was not a shortage. And so I ended up in a pediatric ER. And so over the years, I've really kind of focused on that passion that nurses bring to the table. You were talking about nurses in the highlight. There's a lot of statistics out there, and according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in their 2014 to 2024 publication, they were talking about the numbers of nurses and how that number continually increases. In those 10 years, they're projecting an increase of about 16%, which seems like not a lot, but in healthcare landscape today, it's a lot.
I think that in general, healthcare is becoming even bigger than anybody really realizes, because there's everything in our life is all about health. And it's actually the thing that really matters the most, because you can't take all the other stuff with you anyway. And so I think that the roles that most of us kind of think about nurses as assistants to doctors, and but not getting paid, maybe what they're worth in all the work and decision making that they actually have to end up doing. And so that's why I'm saying I think that there's been more books written. I think more experiences that have been shared, and any experience that you've had going to the hospital, it's always the nurses that you see first. And they're the ones that you see afterwards, and most of the time, that are truly providing the care that you need to get better.
And, it's interesting. They talk about the world's most trusted professions. Nursing has been in the top 10, actually the top 5 over the past several years. And, nursing, back when Florence Nightingale started what nursing is, really defined that nursing is a different practice than medicine. Yes. And interestingly enough, there is such a shortage across the United States of primary care physicians, and those are very well seen in rural areas, and I know in Appalachian areas where I grew up, there are a lot of vacancies. And so there's been a great push over the last 10 years by the American Nurses Association and by the American Association of Colleges of Nursing to kind of partner so that they could expand that scope of nursing. So we now have nurse practitioners who are filling a lot of those gaps that exist in the primary care. We also have the creation of retail clinics, right? Have you ever been to a Minute Clinic?
Yeah, I have.
Or seen in that? I love them, right? And who's going to see you? The nurse practitioners.
Exactly.
And interestingly enough, those clinics started by a master's prepared nurse working on her thesis. This was a nurse's idea. Can you believe that?
I love it. I love it. Yeah. I didn't know that. So yeah. I mean, all of that is great. I think that I really have to say that I think nurses in general are finally getting a voice of their own and being recognized for the great jobs that they do. You currently are teaching, because you're really a teaching, educating nurse. So tell me a little bit about that, and where do you currently work right now?
So I kind of transitioned. I went from a manager of an ICU, both surgical and medical, and they were looking for faculty. Believe it or not, they were looking for advanced degrees, and it was a diploma school transitioning in a hospital setting to associate degree. So I kind of got moved from leadership in the hospital to educator role. And I think that was my passion all along. I think that's where I was meant to be.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm with Ameritech College of Healthcare. It is a small college based in Draper, Utah. And I have had the great opportunity to launch 4 years ago an online BSN degree completion program and to put my flair into it. And so the program design was really led by me. I was fortunate to have such great leadership with Julie Aiken, who was the program director of the time at the associate degree program. It varies from the second to the third in the state of Utah in size, great outcomes, but we really wanted to provide the students who were enrolling in our ground associate degree to be able to have a pathway to a bachelor's so that they too could seek advanced practice roles.
Right. I think that it's so interesting to really, see that there are these different levels that never existed before within these practices that fill in for all the duties and responsibilities that one single, I'm just going to say nurse, can't do. And I think that that's great. I love the fact that you found your passion and your dream in the educational side of it. And I do have to say this, it brings in the entrepreneur side of what you're doing too, being able to create what you've created online for these certifications. And so it's kind of like you've got that mix of education and entrepreneurship and education and all of these great things that really have come together for you. So I want to take this and talk about, we always talk about holistic. And I kind of take a look at that. I've been in health and wellness for most of my life. And so I totally understand what holistic stands for and what it's all about. But I definitely want your idea and your description of what you might say that. But I often say something simple, like if you can find something that is holistic and not take pills, then I think that may be a better path.
I couldn't agree more, Shea. So, fun little tidbit. I have a 14-year-old son. His name's Ryan, and my daughter, Emily, is 16. And we've implemented essential oils into our home. So my clinical background for many, many years was emergency nursing, right? So lots of pills, lots of drugs, lots of Western medicine interventions, right? So my household has really moved to, there are a variety of oils, but lavender. My kids, when they're having a bad day or they're really stressed or they really want to go to sleep, they'll put lavender on their forehead and the back of their neck, and they get relaxation from that.
They do.
It's been interesting. Another kind of compound, not relating to one oil over another, but there's a specific mix. It's called Deep Blue. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but my daughter is a cheerleader in high school varsity, and she broke her growth plate in her foot. So we went to the orthopedic surgeon, and he said, look, are you going to keep a cast on, or can we trust you in a boot? Well, my daughter is really great, and she didn't like the idea of a cast and, not being able to wash, and so we opted for the boot. So every night when she got a shower, we put oils over the site. When we went back at the 4-week mark to the orthopedic doctor, he did another x-ray, and it was completely healed. And he said, what did you do? And I said, well, we used a, oil blend. And he said, I'm hearing that a lot more in practice. I think I'm going to have to do some research so I can start recommending some of this.
I love that. I mean, it's so true. And there's so many stories out there that validate all of the things that you're talking about. But one of the questions I also had is, I've always learned that there was a shortage of nurses. And I know that we talked about it growing, 17% or whatever that you had mentioned. But is there a shortage of nurses out there in general?
So yes, there is. When you look at some of the current reports, I like the American Nurses Association. They have briefs annually that they usually post. Right. But just to give you some kind of numbers, right? So we're projecting this growth, but we also have a large body of these nurses that are retiring. Just in 2014, there was some research done, and they were looking at nurses who were exiting the workforce. So we're seeing about 550,000 annually that are exiting the workforce. We then have to figure out how we're going to increase the flow of nurses from academic into the workforce, right? We also know another piece of this whole puzzle is we have an aging workforce of nurses. An average age is about 50. And when you can say in a profession that more than 50% are over the age of 50, that's going to compound. You look at life expectancy, right? Life expectancy many years ago, back in the 1900s, was 49 years of age. Wow. Now we're looking at close to 79 years of age. I mean, we're talking about all this landscape, and you did such a nice introduction there with how things are changing. We have technology. So I think that you're seeing, some of the larger cities, more nurses are attracted, and there are a variety of reasons for that. But we still see a lot of shortages in some certain states, and especially in the rural areas.
Right. So it really becomes, how do you replace the people that are exiting and yet grow at the same time? And that's a challenge.
And that is $1 million question. And that's led to a lot of partnerships, right? So we now have the colleges of nursing, the schools of nursing, who are working together with the hospitals. They're working together to help meet those needs. There's also a large number of vacancies in nursing faculty. Right. So we've got some bottlenecks there that we're trying to figure out as well, too.
And that provides opportunities, but, you have to have people that want to step up and accept those responsibilities and take that role on, which then brings me to just, healthcare in general. And this is a large landscape. And so it doesn't just talk about nurses or whatever. It really talks about, different institutes that are going up that are healthcare centers, and providing all kinds of different kinds of services and products that are more holistic, that we were talking about, and are maybe even different procedures and options. Tell me what today's healthcare landscape look like to you.
So when you talk about the healthcare landscape, it's very complicated. You not only have the regulation of the federal government and of the state governments, you also have the insurance, and then you have the big pharmaceutical companies. Everyone has a say in this, right? And so when you start looking at there's three main areas in healthcare that I look at, and that is a balance between cost, between effective care, and between quality. So within that landscape, there's been a lot of movement towards evidence-based practice, exactly. And there's been a lot of movement into that holistic realm. One of my favorite studies that's been published was published out of the Cleveland Clinic back in 2009, right? So it's been a while.
Yeah.
And they came up with something called Code Lavender. So Code Lavender is exactly what we're talking about. It's holistic. It includes the use of touch therapy. It includes aromatherapy with some of the oils we've been talking about, music. And Shea, you're into the fitness and the nutrition. All of that is kind of combined into Code Lavender.
Yeah. I love that.
And
it needs to be, because there's not any one or two or three things that work. It really depends on what your issues are. Everybody's different, how they respond to certain things, and just really their own attitudes and what they feel that they should be trying or not trying, or what seems, hokey spokey to them, to traditional medicine. And so there's a whole mindset, which is even harder than most anything else, to kind of bring that around, because tradition, is something that's hard to get, around, especially if that's how we've been raised and we don't know about the other side of that. It doesn't just come, oh, I'm going to embrace it, this is great. It's kind of like, I'm not quite sure what we're talking about here, and I don't know if those oils really do work, and that doesn't sound like, medicine to me. And there's a lot of people that live in that world. And it's really the educational side of that. And I think you'll agree with me that there needs to be more information out there about these things and incorporated in what we call that healthcare landscape, which is what you're telling me is being done.
It is. It's slow, right? It takes about 10 years for research to go from research to the bedside. We know that, right? And that's a long time. But I do see a lot of changes. And I see, when I look at nurses in the healthcare system, because you and I, we both use the healthcare system. And it's really nice to see the nurse kind of moving forward with some of these holistic medicine treatments and therapies, and pain management and touch therapy and aromatherapy. They all have research that support that they work. It's just getting that research, to be utilized more frequently in practice. I think we're going that way. We've moved.
I think we are too. I think we are definitely going that way. But once again, it's helping everyone to have a better understanding about what the possibilities are for one treatment to work over another one, so that they can embrace the option to try it. Just put your foot in the water a little bit, and it doesn't always work for everybody. And I think that really has a lot to do with believing. I think that our minds are very powerful. And I think that we have to embrace things to have them work as best as they possibly can. So one last thing, trends as far as advanced degrees, because we started out with that, and all of the different degrees that are popping up to fill certain needs within the medical industry, and especially with nurses and doctors. So what's the advanced degrees in the future?
So as we look at the needs, and as the healthcare system landscape continues to change, moving more towards preventative, and we have a lot of folks that are very much looking at nutrition and exercise and fitness. I guess all of that's going to play a large role.
Yeah, I got to stop there and say yay, because everybody knows the importance of eating a balanced meal and eating healthy, whatever that happens to look like, because everybody might think they're eating healthy, but if they don't read labels, that's not necessarily true. And certainly exercise has so many benefits to it. And yet we know that it really does take mental and emotional intelligence to be sustainable. You talked about this before, talking about, you didn't use the word sustainable. I'm trying to think of the word that you use, but something that is that you can chart, that you can see results from. And sustainability is what that's all about. And I can tell you, it's kind of like if you are trying something and you're putting 100% of your, your efforts into something, I know only one thing comes out of that it's success. But when you're doing 30% or 40%, guess what? It's not. And it's that simple to me when we talk about the benefits of just those two elements. Because prevention is about championing those diseases like certain kinds of cancer, like heart disease, like obesity. All of those things are preventable. And so where do we get to that stage first that we really focus on those things and help people to understand not just the importance for themselves, but for their families and for their loved ones?
It's interesting as you talk about, prevention. I just read an article that was published that if you spend 20 minutes in the sun, that it can reduce your risk of about 28 types of cancer. And that's not using sunscreen, right? And so what have we been told for so long? Put sunscreen on, put sunscreen on. And now the reason...
I just got to tell you something. I've never used it. And that's why every time somebody is tested, they're lacking D3. I mean, that's what the sun gives you. It heals you. It's good for you. It doesn't mean that you should be out there laying in it for hours and blistering and all of those things, but you need direct sunlight every single day for at least 15 to 20 minutes.
We are on the same page with so much. And, you talk about the new advanced degrees and in nursing. We're starting to see a lot more holistic in a lot of those programs. Our program, our BSN completion at Ameritech, it does have holistic. And we've kind of taken that one step further, and we're one of 13 in the country endorsed by the American Holistic Nurses Credentialing. Mm-hmm. And so to me, this expansiveness of, what nurses' roles are going to look like in the future, they continue to expand scope, and we continue to add those relevant pieces specifically related to holistic within the curriculums.
Right. So we're going to see more practitioner types of leadership nurses as far as managers, are concerned, and many more after that. So I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being on the show today and being our expert, which you definitely qualify for, and really just sharing all the things. I love the fact. Didn't know that we were going to be talking, about the oils and some of the other things as far as holistic is concerned, but it all does fall under that. And thank you so much for sharing that. I want to thank our audience today for tuning in to the Shea Vaughn Show. And we'll be back again next week. Until then, stay joyful and try those oils. Thanks so much for being on the show.